The section on large loads, getting loans, this is directed to say, unfortunately, Sophie, wasn't able to come in the public as the moderator of today's session. So this is a really good session today. It's a super hot topic. As you all know, large loads are growing, and there's been huge numbers of headlines around, power grids can't keep up. Americans are running out of power, and Charlie mentioned yesterday that ERCOT may be doubling its load by 2030, 2020. So we're looking at large number of data centers, onshoring of manufacturing, hydrogen, EV fleets, industrial electrification. There's a lot of reasons why we're getting these large step loads. And I wanted to let everybody know, we have a long-term load forecasting task force that's been going on for about a year now. For those of you who are new, about a year ago, this workshop actually had a parallel track. And the entire parallel track's been forecasting. Anyway, out of that workshop, we decided to start a task force. So we started a task force, for example, Black is part of our task force, and it has a subgroup on large loads, and we're looking at, what sort of characteristics and growth large loads, how to think about forecasting for them. Also, I wanted to let you know we are anticipating to kick off in the fall a new large load task force specifically on issues sort of everything 50,000 large. So interconnection, right through requirements, electrification models, including forecasting, transmission planning, large loads. So there's going to be a lot of stuff on large loads happening in these things. So please tune in. The latest crisis in the country, it seems like there's always a crisis going on. There's wildfires and there's extreme weather and data centers seem to be the newest crisis. So Dominion Energy spoke to us in this task force I mentioned earlier. They connect over 4 gigawatts of data centers since 2019. And a quarter of their electricity sales there to serve data centers. So that's huge. We recently had a task force meeting where we were talking about data centers, and some folks were thinking, the largest data centers, and someone from ERCOT mentioned an 800 megawatt data center that's been in operation in West Texas for a while. So that's one single facility, 800 megawatts. And utilities are now getting requests for 1 gigawatt plus single facilities. You probably know that data centers get built in stages. Well, usually it takes like 4 or 5 years until they reach that full maximum load. Now they're reaching that in 2 or 3 years. So they're ramping up much faster as well. And then other things to know, there's different kinds of applications of data centers, right? So cloud services, for example, they require fiber. They come close to fiber for latency requirements, because they need to be able to serve information very quickly. But we're learning that AI services, maybe some AI services, don't have such stringent latency requirements. So now siting is happening in more rural areas where land is cheaper, so farther away from fiber. So understanding these things is really important for planners and forecasters, so they can understand where these things are likely to be needed. In PJM, ESIG is getting requests for behind-the-meter data centers sited at nuclear facilities, right, to try and get those carbon-free energy requirements. And Scott Rich is here in the audience, and he was mentioning to me that I think there's already data centers sited behind the nuclear facilities. On the right here, this is just showing the dark blue is showing capacity of data centers in the 10 biggest data center hubs around the country in terms of megawatts, and then the white part is showing the new additional capacity that's expected in the next 5 years. So you can see a lot of these places are expected to double or more what their existing capacity is. With Northern Virginia, of course, being the lead at something like looking at 10 to 11 gigawatts of data center capacity. Data centers today, they make up about 2.5% of US load according to the Wall Street Consulting Group. That's expected to triple by 2030, up to triple by 2030. This is expected to be not just those places that I mentioned in the last one, there's 10 places, but it's becoming a much broader phenomenon than just Northern Virginia and places in Texas. In addition to data centers, we also have onshoring and manufacturing. Got a lot of policies in the Senate, federal government trying to bring manufacturing back into the US. And so this graphic comes from DOE's interactive data set showing over 200 manufacturing facilities for clean energy industries, transportation. You can especially see Georgia, the Carolinas, hosting a lot of this, the Midwest, Michigan and India especially, and then the Southwest, Arizona, Nevada, and we're going to hear from the Southwest today about this topic. And then, of course, significant amounts of hydrogen are forecast. So we are expecting large hydrogen hubs in addition to other hydrogen facilities. Today, installed capacity is on the order of 67 megawatts, 2 gigawatts has been announced in ERCOT, and 700 megawatts in this region here, near Mountain West. So we're expecting very large growth in the hydrogen sector as well. So today, we're really lucky to have 4 speakers talking about different aspects of large load growth. First, we are going to hear from Victor Lee, who's the Senior Market Strategy Advisor at MISO, and he's going to talk about forecasting growth in large loads. So, Victor, I set you on this slide.
Thank you. Can everybody hear me okay? So hello everybody, my name is Victor Lee. I'm the Senior Market Strategy Advisor at MISO. I'm here to participate in the discussion on behalf of our team. My team's name is Strategic Insights, and recently we've been supporting our local forecasting progress. And here I'm just going to talk about some high-level information and frameworks and how we on this. And we have like 7 or 8 slides, so hopefully we can for you to this slow one. So this slide is just briefly introduce how we approach forecasting, and in general we put them into 3 large segments or terms of the work. Short term, where the focus is more on the day-ahead and real-time operations, multi-day operations, where the time frame usually won't exceed 14 days or 2 weeks. And in the near-term perspective, for the near-term, it's really anything from more than 2 weeks all the way to maybe 2 to 5 years. Some of the process that the audience might be familiar with, including planning resource function that happens every year, and then OMS, which stands for Organization of MISO States. This OMS survey also happens every year. Leaders submit their expectations for the year, median year, as well as the 10-year onwards. So all these near-term, short-term, that they serve very dedicated and standardized procedures. On the other hand, the longer term forecast, where we look into the distant future that includes 5, 10 years and sometimes even longer. This process, because the variability and the magnitude of the inputs are much bigger in my mind compared to the near-term forecast. this tends to be, takes longer, and so, relatively more fluid, so it hasn't been a very, I would say, steady pace on how we've been producing this long-term forecast, and how they've been, utilized. So generally, these long-term forecasts based into the long-term planning model. In MISO, my mind, there are two processes that focus on this long-term planning, building this long-term planning models. One is our long-range transmission expansion model, and also this MISO transmission expansion model. They focus on using simulation models to build features that helps support the transmission cost allocation process. This slide is talking about on the long-term forecasting side on the effort or how we've been thinking about how to improve or make this process become industry best practice. We look at these 4 areas. First one being ensuring that we have a average. So in developing a process, we reach out to levers like SDT, BDMs, as well as the other industry leaders and our members, including this is like Google, Amazon. From partnership perspective, we work with engineers in the East. Shout out to the Blue University, the state utility forecasting has been engaged with us for a long time and providing us a lot of the inputs on climate forecasting. Information sources, we included a wide variety of internal data sources as well as external information sources that many of you may have dealing with from EIA, from the economic database, for economic, as well as the some work on the proprietary vendor industry. In the following slides, I'm going to dive a little bit deeper into the methods, because that's something my team really wanted to share with you. So in our team's mind, we try to I guess improve or transition from the traditional forecasting methods that's been employed for long-term forecasting for a while, which is more based on econometric models, or for lack of a better term, unseries regressions. Right? Traditionally, they've been driven by standard economic indicators of inputs, what's domestic production of the state. So, what we are focusing on now, for the near-term years, we're trying to bring in some innovative techniques to build a reconstituted model where the time series will serve as the baseline, think of it as the base layer of the cake, and then we layer on especially with today's topic, those large loads. In the future, we aim to increase the amount of the sort of the judgment calls that I mentioned on the bottom, higher layer of those cakes, and also focusing on extreme weather events, as well as these pay more attention to the end use and changes in net load and physics. We mentioned net load here. We want sometimes there's confusion about how you define the net loads. So some might think of it as low minus the Venus equation. Now, in this particular slide, is the load that's observed from ISO for some markets minus the it's constantly minus the root of, so it's out of ISO's control. But here, don't pay too much attention about the one furlong It's just really, really rough slide. It's more of a qualitative rather than quantitative slide. But in general, we try to again, the structure of the cake. We try to separate it into these three segments. And the increase there is that we tentatively think that sort of flat stage of low growth might have passes. So if we look at once the system keep low the time of energy growth for the past 20 years of since it's established, you might actually find it's been up and past, but overall it's kind of flat. However, we do see growth in the longer term run. So if we in the residential sector, we're driven by traditional economic indicators. In the commercial and industrial sectors, things becomes more complicated. Especially on the industrial side, I guess our panelists going to get into more details about these large facilities, things like that. Here is some attempt trying to not get too much attention why it's 2, not 2.5 and 2.3. But what we're trying to showcase is we think about the different orders of magnitudes of the size of the load. So although residential might be small in individual, but collectively that's still a large segment of the load drivers. Previously, in the internal workshop, this slide we have the logos are the typical examples of each of the settings. Is represented. Move all of them, but I guess in your mind, you see this sometimes maybe something we probably have. Sections, I wonder if we should really expand the numbers on the far right, 200 megawatt. So the situation of data center, and another thing about it. Get the idea. This slide, it's an oversimplification of the steps or the frameworks of what we're trying to put out into this investment process. So instead of running more analytic models based on time series data, in this part of the method, we're trying to modulate models organic growth, starting from our assumptions about the technology will penetrate. Some of you might be familiar with the S-curve and technology adoptions. So we think MISO, although it covers a large territory of the US continent, but it might have its unique economic and technology adoption curve compared to, say, our neighbors in the east or neighbors in the west. So we're going to adjust that penetration curve into our industry research, and then we'll develop a low-determined model. Think about it when we try to link the information where you get from, say, electric vehicle adoption penetration curve. Say you arrive at, okay, I believe in as a state there will be 10,000 EVs by 2025. How do you convert to exactly to the load that will impact on the wholesale market? That's where that low-determined formula comes in. And then there's a temporal, so the extrapolation of back scaling, where we put it into the hourly end use profiles. And then there's also behavior evolutions over time. So when you first buy an EV, maybe you just plug in the light to work. But then maybe the continue down some kind of use tariff, and then you check the behavior of patterns. Before that, what we aim to do is then we'll be able to have a more finer control on the long-term trajectory MISO level, and sometimes in the more granular detail. So MISO has 10, we define 10 local resource zones So, 39 local balancing authorities who dedicated their balancing power to MISO. So that's where we might be building this long-term battery on a monthly basis for the next 20 years. And then lastly, once you have that high-level control table, as some of my team members call it, then you can allocate energy hash into an hourly forecast on that locational granularity and more granularity, and then begin to the any model that we can do. But this is the sort of annual three-step approach to mitigate. So this is my last slide, and one of our team members who is really the mastermind for this, Mr. Hagerty, really wanted me to emphasize that this is featured after doing low testing for 30 years. So this bow tie is the key image, and we will review after today's presentation because we really think that this orange square in the middle, the knot of the bow tie, the diagonal motion is the link between long-term, I guess we could put the near-term in there as well, and the day-to-day short-term local state. So we need this link to make sure that operations and planners agree or align on the quote-unquote terms. Otherwise, in the past, in some cases, the planning team with statistical expectation, and that deviates from more tangible day-to-day variations. And then people just talking in their own language and say, it's nature. So by having this, we call it the both sides, we establish this synchronization and efficient changes. So yesterday that when the fellows mentioned, well, we got 5 AI models that we look like 2 3 days. It's the experience operator. 20 years or 10 years ago, I saw a thing like this, so I'm going to do it. So this library would like to do it in a more systematic way. When you look at this condition, you can think about, oh, these things has happened in the past, going to the long term analysis. And then you might be able to, hopefully, that will unify my service to various forecast classes that I'm sure in the beginning. That's it. And that's what it's all about. Yes. Okay.
Thank you so much, Victor. It's a great presentation. Are there any clarifying questions for Victor?
The last slide, I mean, you pretty much nicely summarized it, but where's the weather data entering there?
So the weather, we'll think that it's all embedded. So when you think about the shape that we develop, it will be not just say, oh, this shape is the average of 5 years of January 1st, but we will also develop the shapes of this 75 Fahrenheit in a certain area. And then there's an 85 shape that's in there. So weather data could be one of the dimensions where you sort of organize the shape library. That's how we think.
Thank you. We will have time for discussion. Okay, so I am happy to introduce our next speaker, James Jones, who's the Senior Operations Research Analyst with forecasting at the Northern Virginia Electric Cooperative. And he's going to talk about some of these data center issues that we've all been named this.
You guys hear me okay? Okay, yeah, so, about data centers. Virginia, we have been dealing with data centers for a number of years, and it's been kind of funny to see it become a broader regional issue. Everybody knows what a data center is now, what a GPU is, and what AWS is. So I'm going to share some of the growth we've seen over the last few years, some of the challenges, particularly when it comes to long-term planning, and how we deal with that through the load forecasting process. Of course, happy to answer any questions y'all may have, whether it's in the discussion or afterward. Please pull me aside. I'm more than happy to discuss. So first off, what is NOVEC? NOVEC is the Northern Virginia Electric Cooperative, which my guess is an electric cooperative in Northern Virginia. Our service territory covers about 650 square miles of what most people would call the outskirts of Northern Virginia. So if you're not familiar with this part of the country, you can think of a place where the urban environment and the rural countryside meet, and our service territory mostly straddles that transition zone. So the vast majority of NOVEC's customers are residential with some small commercial scattered throughout there. We've got about 180,000 meters, which if you do the math is like 75 per square mile. Compared to your typical co-op, that is a very dense system, but at the same time, not nearly the density you'd see in most munis or large IOUs. So even before the data centers, we've always been this kind of unique kind of utility, and then the data centers came and that really changed everything. At the moment, we are serving more than 50 data centers, and their load is running in the 900 to 1,000 megawatt range. Folks coming from big systems, 1,000 megawatts might be a rounding error for us, it's a lot. Over the past 12 months, data centers have accounted for more than 60% of our system energy, not 60% of the commercial sector, 60% of the whole business. We look at our peak loads last summer and last winter, we're talking 45–50% of our whole system and growing rapidly. The reason we have so many data centers just boils down to our service territory, really. I mean, we can go into the discussion why there are so many data centers in Northern Virginia, but suffice to say, it's the place to be. The industry really got started in an area called Ashburn. I don't know if I have a pointer, but you may be able to see up in that top right corner a little area named Ashburn. NOVEC does not serve Ashburn. That's Dominion Energy service territory. That's why they've seen this rapid growth that we talked about earlier. But over time, as more and more data centers came into Ashburn, it became more and more costly to build sites there. So we saw developers creeping south into our portion of Loudoun County and increasingly Prince William County, Virginia. There's a stretch in Prince William running, it's like, well, if you see that little pocket in our service territory there that you may be able to read as Gainesville, in and around Gainesville, Virginia is essentially turning into Ashburn 2.0. That's where NOVEC's offices are, that's where I live, that's where some of you may live. And if you're in there, you see it everywhere. And so this has really had a dramatic impact on our system. This chart I'm showing you here is our peak loads over the last decade or so, with data centers in green and everything else in orange. And so you can see for most of the so anyways, through the mid to early 2000s, we had a little bit of load growth, but nothing too exciting. And then around 2017, the data centers hit in a major way, and between 17 and 22, our system grew by 50%, 500 megawatts. Last year, we did another 250 in just 1 year. This year, we're running 200–300 megawatts ahead of where we were last year, and the pace is just accelerating. This has really had a transformative effect on the whole organization. We could do a multi-day conference on everything at our organization. But I think what's going to be most interesting to folks in this room is what's going on in the local electric system. NOVEC, we're just a little electric distribution cooperative. Well, technically, we're the largest electric distribution cooperative in the country, but we still only do distribution retail. We get transmission service from Dominion. They run the broader Dominion transmission zone, which itself is part of the PJM footprint. If you dig real deep into the appendix of PJM's latest load forecast, you can find this chart on the right, which has history and forecast of data center loads for the DOM zone. You may not be able to read the legend. The blue bar is Dominion, the orange is NOVEC, gray and yellow are two other co-ops in Virginia. And if you look at the y-axis, the magnitude of this growth is staggering. We're talking about doing something on the order of 20 gigawatts of load in a 15-year period. And you can tell that orange bar, a lot of that is NOVEC. And so this has created a lot of challenges up in PJM and Dominion. Where things kind of get spicy is transmission planning. Northern Virginia has very little local generation, so we're reliant on the transmission system to bring power in from the surrounding areas. And as far as I know, there isn't much plans to put a whole bunch of generation in the middle of the Northern Virginia suburbs. And so we're depending on incredible development of new transmission. And so the planning and forecasting teams have kind of been linked at the hip these last few years. And these planning challenges weren't just sort of an amorphous thing that might come. We're already living in them today. Summer 22, Dominion Transmission had to implement constraints in a small pocket of eastern Loudoun County. There were some data centers there that were existing, under construction, some NOVEC, some Dominion. Dominion Transmission said, you cannot connect with your customers. The existing customers need to curtail their load. The transmission system cannot connect. So those constraints didn't go on for a couple hours or a couple days. Building new transmission takes years. We are still dealing with those problems. And you can imagine the local stakeholders were, we had folks coming out of the woodwork saying, NOVEC, Dominion, you guys have an obligation to serve, right? And some time goes on. Now PJM at the end of last year has released $5 billion transmission upgrades. And you go and you read the report. What is it for? Getting transmission into Northern Virginia. Well, we don't take that $5 billion and make the data center pay. We're all paying. Data centers are paying. I'm paying. If you live in PJM, you're paying. So now we have a whole new round of stakeholders coming in and saying, why are we building this? Why am I having to pay for this? What's a data center? What on earth is NOVEC? And so the planning folks are under intense pressure. Get anybody PJM or Dominion transmission planning, be very nice to them. They got a hard job. Because they need to plan for this crazy load forecast. They explain that to the stakeholders, and now the mob comes over to forecasting and says, why is the forecast so high? Why is it so low? It should be different. It's become a very contentious process. As well as it maybe should be. The stakes are very high if we don't get this right. So the number one thing we've learned, and we recommend to other folks, if you're dealing with a large volume of data centers, you need a sound and defensible process. And when I say defensible, I'm talking about how we interact with non-technical stakeholders. Folks in this room, I'm sorry, you guys are not the target audience for the forecasting process. We need to be able to explain what we're doing. Somebody who has never done load forecasting before, and they need to be able to say, fine, okay. So when we talk about them, how we do that, but think about that. Public terms we're going to talk about, these are terms we use, we've heard other people use. First is contract capacity. Every data center in our service territory signs an electric service agreement. And within that, they define how much capacity they want for their distribution. Now, there's a whole bunch of metrics you can use to define how big a data center is. We like to use contract capacity because it takes into account the size of the building, how many servers are in there, how much HVAC is there. We use that one number to compare the size of multiple buildings, but it doesn't tell you about energy or demand. You can sign a huge contract and use all of it, use none of it, use somewhere in between. So we also look at what we call meter demand. You remember what is the customer actually using? What are we looking at right now? Summer peak, winter peak, light load. I can express those two together as a utilization rate. If you've got a contract for 60, only 30, that's 50%. For some of you, this might seem basic. For some stakeholders, this is challenging. And so that's kind of how we think about the forecast. What's getting built and how is it being used? Well, what a data center is and what's getting built has really changed over time. The first generation data centers we saw look like this guy up in the top left. Customer comes in, they put down one building. And by today's standards, they're pretty small, 10, 20, 30 MVA. And that's contract capacity. Not talking about anything about how they use their service, that's just the size of the building. And then pretty quickly, we saw folks moving to building out campuses. So they'll put 2, 3, 4 data centers together. At the same time, the buildings were getting larger. Now they're contracting for 30, 40, 50 MVA. And so at that point, we moved away from talking about buildings and more focused on the total capacity. So this campus is 120 MVA campus, whether it's 2 buildings, 3 buildings, 6 buildings, that's 120 MVA of contract. And over time, new campuses got bigger and bigger and bigger. We didn't have any capacity in the distribution system to pull feeders to them. We needed to start building dedicated substations to every new data center campus that's coming in. We've been doing that for the last few years. What we've got coming in now are these, I don't know what we're going to call them, mega campuses, is what I'm calling them here. Where a customer will buy one large parcel of land and fill it full of data centers, and we're building 2, 3, 4, 5 substations. In our part of the country, we're limited to 300 MVA substations, just for scale here. You've got a pair of projects that are both 10+ substations. So we heard the 3.8 gigawatt number yesterday, and we're like, yeah, that's a data center, right? How many of those do you have? You know, we gotta go. And so this is the contract capacity side. You've got new development coming in with buildings getting bigger, it kind of drives this exponential growth in the amount of data center activity that's in there. And then on the other side, we have the utilization. Data centers have kind of a unique load profile. When you build a new data center, you don't put everything in there, wire it up, set up the HVAC, and then come to utility and say, turn on my lights. They turn on the lights as soon as possible, and so you've got servers running in room A while you're building out room B, and so over time, the building's load ramps up. And eventually it gets to a point where it's mature. All the servers that are in there are gonna go in there. At maturity, the load is for the most part stable, but not totally flat. That's when folks say, oh, it's a flat load. Not quite. You do see regular seasonal fluctuation, you do see weather sensitivity, but yes, the load factor, you know, regardless of what time scale you're looking at, tends to be very high. So if you've got one data center, assuming a flat load probably isn't the worst. If you have a lot, that magnitude of that swing does become important, which it is for us in the broader DOM zone. The big thing you see is a lot of heterogeneity. Every single data center customer is totally different. So we have folks asking us, well, how long does it take to ramp? Depends. Some customers ramp in a year and a half, some customers ramp in like 10 years. Same thing with maturity. Well, what utilization do you run at when you're full? Some are like 50, 60, some are 80, 90. So it's very difficult to say what does the typical data center look like, even within our small service territory. So that's kind of the two pieces that we're going to put together in the forecasting process. Data centers for us form kind of a natural hierarchy where you have buildings, campuses, substations, region, and our system. There's lots of ways you can do really cool stuff with hierarchy forecasting. In this context, we need it to be simple and defensible, so we take a bottom-up approach where we're generating forecasts for individual data center buildings that we then aggregate out, at least for outcomes that are coincidence. And there's essentially two steps I'll talk about. First is defining explicitly every single data center to generate forecasts for, and then generating those forecasts. We call this first step the planning stage, where we're going through and identifying every data center that's going to be here today and tomorrow. So this is going to include things that are active, things that are under construction, and it's also going to include things from our development queue. We essentially have a multi-year queue of projects that want to energize, but we don't bring that whole queue to the load forecast. We only bring the projects through that are moved far enough along that we can be as close to certain as possible that this is a real project. Because we get a lot of sort of speculative projects, and maybe, you know, I might build a data center somewhere, maybe. We don't put that in the load forecast. We need to be able to defend each and every megawatt as we get up to these stakeholders. And so our system planning team is going through and doing a detailed analysis of every single project. Customer needs to have identified some land. They need to own that land. It needs to be zoned for data center. We need a site plan. We need to know where the substation is going. We're going to get the transformers and the breakers, how the transmission is going to get there, how the distribution is going to be laid out. So by the time it gets to the load forecast, we know the project in and out forward backwards. And that essentially establishes a path for just the contracted capacity side. What gets built, when does it come in, where does it go, how is it served? And they pass that over to us on the load forecasting side, and we need to generate a metered load forecast. We've got a set of econometric models that we've been developing and redeveloping for a number of years. We have not open sourced these yet or written any publications on them yet, so I can't get too detailed on it, but suffice to say, you can imagine some ways to predict a growth curve with exogenous covariates, taking into account heterogeneity. Probably guess how we do that. So we build out building level forecasts for each of these buildings, and then aggregate that up to get a system total, region total, whatever we need for the end user. We can look at a couple numbers to put this all together. PJM has an annual load forecasting process. So lately, we've essentially been putting out a once a year load forecast that we give to PJM, we give to Dominion, we use it internally for our own planning and operations. So this is last summer's forecast. We're in the process of updating this year's forecast, but this is the numbers I can share with you publicly. So there's three sets of projections in this table. The top one has the number of data center buildings. The second section below shows the totalized contract capacity. And the third section is a coincident peak load number. So when our system is peaking for that month, what do we think is the totalized load across all those data centers? And so if we look through the top row, as of last summer, we had about 47 data centers, and we were projecting that's going to go by more than 100. But like we talked about earlier, the building count doesn't really tell you the whole story because the buildings are getting bigger. So that's why we like this middle number where we're talking about, well, we were at 1670 MVA contract. We're going to 9,400 MVA of contract. And again, this top two section, there's no extrapolation, there's no statistics, there's no machine learning. This is pure projects. This is the project queue we have with signed contracts as of last year. And then this last piece is the meter load piece, the coincident peak load. And the numbers there are pretty astonishing. We're talking about going from 800 last year to more than almost 4,700, almost 4 gigawatts of load growth in a 5-year period. When we show these numbers to folks, it's challenging. You know? But when we walk through the process and say, well, yes, going from 800 to 4,700 is hard to stomach. But if you build 100 data centers, and these data centers are newer and they ramp at a reasonable rate based on what we've seen historically, you know, it all does kind of, you know, work out a little bit. They still don't like it, but we have folks, they understand it, they accept it. And so we can run that out a few more years. This is our long-term forecast going out 15 years. This is exactly what we saw on the table, just in chart form, where the green line is that contract capacity, and the orange line is metered load. And so you can track that growth up of, so the dashed line is 23, 24, 25, 26, 27, 28, 29, rapid growth, and then you see a plateauing. Now, we're not saying you couldn't keep growing or you won't keep growing, but this is our queue. This is what we have right now. And we think that's enough. That's the most justifiable number. You know, we don't need to add extra projects to this. You know, you can see the meter load number getting from 800 to, what is that, 8,000, 9,000 megawatts. It's a lot of load. One piece we didn't go into here is we're just looking at the totals. The purposes that we have, because it's very granular, we can build it up through individual substations. So when we send this block of load over to the transmission planner, we're saying, here's the amount of load, here is the exact topology. These are all the stations where you need to load it up. And that, in the data center world, is extremely critical because the load is so dense. You can't just, you know, take care of the trunk lines and assume everything's going to be okay. You need the planning to be done at a very hyper-local level. You can imagine going to a customer and saying, hey, there's no capacity, you can't connect. But if it makes you feel any better, your competitor down the road, they have plenty of capacity. It's good, right? It's not good. So that's sort of a day in the life at NOVEC. It's a fun, exciting space to work. Where we talk about data centers. Data centers is a big thing in NOVEC, Northern Virginia, and it's impacting the whole DOM zone. This rapid load growth is challenging. We only talked about the planning side. We could do a whole other thing, and imagine how you build dozens of substations in a very short period of time. If we are done supply chain, that's fun. And so when it comes to load forecasting, it absolutely needs to be a sound and defensible process so that all of the stakeholders who are involved can get it. So that's what I got.
Thank you so much, James, for that fascinating look into what you're dealing with in Northern Virginia. I imagine there's a lot of questions, but let's keep it to just the clarifying questions, since we just have time for maybe 1 or 2 clarifying questions. So now, you want to just go to the next one? I think it's a big room.
So James, I'm wondering about load flexibility. Like, are any of these data centers flexible? Are you incorporating that into?
So far, as far as I know, we have not had any customer coming and saying that they're interested in having their load curtailed or being flexible or participating in the market in any way. In most cases, it's the exact opposite. They want to make sure they have capacity. They're not going to turn off Netflix or shut down Amazon's website because it got hot outside and prices. I think they may do some stuff on the market side where they're, you know, hedging financially. We haven't seen a lot of sort of operational load swings to to participate in that.
You, sir, would ask.
Wait, yeah. Question?
Oh, sorry.
So, are these all retail access, direct access customers, or are you involved in their power supply in any way? And so how are you tracking the other customers get through?
So in Virginia, customers who are larger than 5 megawatts can procure their own energy. It's an option that they can pursue. Some data centers do allow to do that. Some of them don't. Again, we have our whole market side has developed essentially a data center group to going in and procuring power for them. I can't get too much into the details, but suffice to say that is another one of the challenges, is making sure they have power and making sure that their costs don't negatively impact other members.
I think we're gonna. Next, I'd like to introduce Joseph Church. He's the senior forecast and load analyst for Salt River Project. And he's going to be talking about new manufacturing for the load growth.
Can everybody hear me okay? Okay, seems like it's. Okay, well, there's not a lot of similarities between SRP, where I work in NOVEC, but the one similarity is we're seeing a lot of large growth. So a little bit about SRP. You may wonder, well, what is SRP? The official title of our utility is Salt River Project and Agricultural Improvement Districts. So it's nice, succinct name. The reason it's called that is years ago, we actually started in 1903 as a small water users association. So basically a bunch of farmers in the Phoenix, in the valley there, what we call it. Got together and created this association, and because of the National Reclamation Act of 1902, they were able to put up their land as capital to build the Roosevelt Dam on the Salt River, or the upper Salt River, which allowed them to get water. And today we now are a utility, electric utility, plus we control water in the area too. Over 1 million customers. We broke our peak load last year. Also we share the Phoenix, we share the Phoenix metro area, Arizona Public Service, their big utility in the area. We split the Phoenix area about 50-50, give or take a couple percentage points. And our peak load, we broke a record last year by over 500 megawatts at 8,163 megawatts. Now most of that was driven by weather. We had the hottest July we've ever had by far. It was basically like, for any weather people in the room, meteorologists, it's very interesting. It was almost like living in Death Valley last July, which wasn't very fun. But in the future, those jumps in megawatts are not, hopefully not going to come from weather as well, but these large loads and data centers in London. I'm focusing today though on manufacturing, even though we are seeing data center growth as well. What we call large customers at SRP is a little bit different than maybe some other utilities. It's not like the size cutoff, like the size, like 10 megawatts, 15 megawatts, etc. It's anything that has a dedicated substation. Now, typically these customers are 10 megawatts or bigger, but we have some older legacy customers that are under 10 megawatts. So the sizes of these, what we call large customers, range anywhere, say 2 megawatts all the way up to 100, 200. And we have different types of large customers. As you can see here, a lot of it is semiconductor manufacturing, Intel, and then like chip supply chain. We also have, or we're gonna do some battery manufacturing and some other smaller, other types of manufacturing. And then I mentioned too, data centers. We do have data centers. It's one of the hot areas for data centers as well. Nothing like Northern Virginia, but it's growing a lot. And then interestingly, this is another little tidbit about Arizona. We supply about 2/3 of US copper production. And some of those copper mines are in our service territory. Now, historically, our load growth has come from just people moving to Phoenix. It's been a very popular place to move over the past 2-3 decades. And so our load growth is always, we never really had a flat period of load growth. It's always just grown from population. We'll just keep using the phrase, people keep moving here. What this chart illustrates, however, is since the Great Recession, the source of that growth has been shifting. As you can kind of see here, it's been shifting to these large customers. And I have these bars broken out by kind of our residential, small commercial, large manufacturing, and then our other large customers. Which what I'm focusing on today is the green bars. In 2008, these large manufacturers comprised about 6.5% of our total energy sales. And today it's about 10%. And then by 2035, we project it will be about 15% of total energy sales. I wanted to add this other bar in here because if you add in data centers and mining, which mining is very small compared to data centers. But if you add all that in 2035, these large customers are going to comprise about 45% of our total energy sales. So nearly half. So why is manufacturing load increasing? Well, one of the answers is because we have data centers. Manufacturing is linked to data center. Wanted to make sure I don't read it. So data centers require lots and lots and lots and lots of computer, GPU, you've heard the term GPUs, computer chips, microchips, and associated products. And then, data centers, we have data centers because of, consumer electronics. Like my kids sit around half the day, watch GoPro videos that get loaded onto YouTube. And, smart thermostats and electric vehicles. So all these Internet of Things and plus electric vehicles, all of this, needs a place to store the data, and then the data centers and all those devices require computer chips, and so all these things are linked together. One thing too that we're seeing a lot of growth in is autonomous driving. In the Phoenix area, we have Waymo, so you can get a ride share in a car that has no driver. I haven't done that yet. I'm comfortable doing that yet. It's like tidbit. I listen to sports radio. I'm a sports guy. And one of the guys on the morning show, he said he was crossing the street or about to cross the street. He waved the car on, but then he realized it was a waving car. So he was waving at a car. Pretty humorous story. Yeah. Well, on the show, he said, "Man, don't for just Another thing that we kind of heard of this companies is all the government incentives. So this is another thing driving manufacturing. So it's just not reshoring companies by themselves bringing manufacturing back, but it's like the CHIPS Act and the Inflation Reduction Act. Intel, that is in our service territory, is a direct beneficiary of CHIPS Act funding, about $8.5 billion. Now, not all of that is for Arizona. They're using that to build, big fabs and Ohio. There are other locations in still Oregon. We have another smaller microchip manufacturer called Microchip in Phoenix. That was a beneficiary of the chip funds. And then maybe some of you have heard of TSMC Semiconductors building a very large semiconductor plant in Phoenix. While that's not in service territory, Intel and TSMC combined are pulling other manufacturers to the area. So we're kind of seeing some of that manufacturing come to our territory because TSMC moved to. Oh, also there's local incentives. The state of Arizona themselves chipped in $100 million for like semiconductor infrastructure and workforce training and research. There's one specific small program called the Arizona Quick Start program, which is training. Make sure I get this right. They're training people to become semiconductor technicians. And the Bureau of Labor Statistics actually estimates that in Maricopa County, which is basically most of the Phoenix metro area, will need over 4,000 computer chip like related jobs by 2032. So I want to talk a little bit about this. This is a large crane. It's called an LR 13,000. It's one of 6 in the world. And this is helping to build, they're using this to help build Intel's new fabrication facilities in Chandler, Arizona. And just a few statistics about this, kind of like to think about it, it's like baseball, if it had its own baseball card. It has a maximum lift height, 774 feet. And it can lift 3,000 tons, which for a little perspective, that's about 428 large male elephants. Or I really like M&Ms, so I calculated how many M&Ms. 3 billion M&Ms. Yeah, anything. That M&M. This picture, I mean, this is just, I like to involve this in my presentation because it just highlights, what this domestic, government incentives and manufacturing growth is highlighting what's kind of happening in our service territory. Now, I wanted to touch on the methodology a little bit because these large customers, just not data centers, but even these large manufacturing for territory, increases the uncertainty and the risk, which has been touched on by previous presenters. So our methodology, this kind of started about 4 years ago, and it's similar to James said, it's a bottom-up approach. And so we came up with what's called the matrix, not the one in but we call it this matrix or a customer matrix, and we score each project, whether it's a new customer, a brand new customer coming to the territory, or maybe an existing customer like Intel, or if they're going to be growing one. And we score them based on certain criteria. You can see the top 5 categories or rows there in the table are the categories. And so we get a score for each category. We get a maturity score. And then we multiply that by what we call, it could be similar to maybe the contracted megawatts, but we call it the customer provided. That's kind of like their wish, what they tell us they're going to use. And then we multiply that by the maturity score on the other side, arrive at a final load forecast for each customer. And then we build it up. And so this is essentially a probability weighted approach because we know in our queue, we have a queue of like 100 projects, and most of them are data centers. But we know not all of them are gonna happen, some of them are not gonna, do what they say they're gonna do, and so this hopefully, kind of averages out to an activity. And this is what it looks like just for our total manufacturing. We do expect our total manufacturing load to increase pretty drastically over the next 5 to 6 years. 60% of the growth is chip manufacturing or related products. The other 40%, a lot of that is LG is building a battery plant east of Phoenix, so that's another chunk. I can talk about that because it's public and I can see it from the campus. Because I live down the road from like the Phoenix data center central area, so there's just a ton of buildings and manufacturing everywhere. But house values. So some of the key takeaways are this increased chip manufacturing is going to support growth in peripheral and related manufacturing and supply chain. Also, I can't emphasize this enough. Data centers and manufacturing growth our manufacturing growth forecasts started increasing when our data center started increasing. And then I also want to highlight the scenarios are a great way to highlight any uncertainty or risk. In fact, we've already had great success with our scenarios, which sometimes can be quite wide because of the nature of these large customers and the expectation. But within SRP, we've already integrated it into our integrated system plan and it's helped parts of the company to understand the risk and to help them in their planning. Well, that's all I had today. Thank you very much.
So much, Jeff. Are there any clarification questions? Next, I would like to introduce.
Just one quick question.
Oh, yeah.
Are there operational definitions associated with those categories? On your.
Oh, on our methodology.
Yeah.
Yeah, those are short, just like short titles. For example, like the land acquisition is easy one, how to purchase the land. And then we have other kind of definitions for each, and we have kind of discrete story.
Are those available at all? Are they in-house? We can talk about one.
Yeah,
I think
yeah,
I think
something
we
I could- yeah, I could definitely show you.
Introduce our next speaker, Mike Hagerty, who's a principal at Brattle. It's going to be talking about industrial batteries, industrial decarbonization.
Thank you. Oh, great, thanks for inviting me. I think this is a really interesting topic to add to this, because the last two presenters really talked about the here and now. That's really surprised a lot of us, and we saw that was happening. And then it was spread across the country, and it's really creating a new opportunity to allow the system in the future. But this is a little bit further out. So this might be something to have on your radar and think about what is the next thing that the and I'll talk through what the technology I'm talking about is, why it's happening, special and could happen. So specifically, my colleagues and I wrote this paper on thermal batteries for C2ES and Thermal Collaborative RTC, really great work in this area, focused on industrial decarbonization, and specifically decarbonizing process heat through this technology called thermal batteries, which I'll describe in a second. So if you're interested, there's a paper on this that covers a lot of the basics. I'll go through today some of the drivers, we'll also talk about the scale of the potential impacts. But before I do that, I wanted to note one thing. This is particularly
interesting topic for me because I've been in Brattle for about 11 years. And a couple of years before that in ground school and power systems. But before that, I used to actually work in places. I worked in oil refineries in Southeast Asia, Saudi Arabia, parts of the US. I used to climb these types of equipment, go up to the top, make sure everything was correctly. I decided I didn't really care what the clearance between two pieces of metal was a quarter inch or a half an inch. Decided to be much more interested in oil, electricity prices. So this is kind of conversions of my two steps on the profession. So if I get a little too nerdy on the industrial side, just say keep going. So first, what are thermal batteries? So this is graphic that we put together to explain how these work. So the thermal battery is here in the middle. It's really resistive here. So this is different from something like a heat pump, that has a COP of 2 or 3 or 5, something that is able to be very efficient. It isn't inefficient, it's around 95% efficient. But you essentially heat up what's shown here, which can be really blocks, bricks, or rocks. They get really hot, and surprisingly stay very hot, they're well insulated and stay hot for a long time. So this was, to be honest, I was a bit skeptical of this technology, having worked on these huge heat type of process, these big fire boxes. But it's really impressive what they can do and how they are starting to develop. But what they're able to do, why they're interesting, is because you're able to heat them up for a certain period of time, a day, 4 to 8 hours, is the general amount of time. And then you essentially superheat them, so you get really hot. Current temperature range is up to about 600 degrees, but some of the developers are going to 1600, 1800, which really consists of the high temperature application. I'll show you in a second. But you essentially superheat these and flow your process through your across it. And it starts really hot because the rock's really hot. And you mix the colder air to get to a constant output temperature. So it's not like you're flowing all of your air past it, and it starts really hot until it's less hot. Because you really need a flat amount of heat coming out of this for industrial process. It has to be a constant thing that you run 24/7. And so you're able to get moved from variable solar and wind resources, and specifically designed to take advantage of the fact that they are not operating. So this is very different from data centers or other industrial loads that are constantly pulling electricity and have a really high load factor. This will have a low load factor, but we can align it with when renewables operate and not on peak demand. So this is a very unique type of demand that is intentionally designed to avoid adding much in terms of transmission other than local interconnection costs, and take advantage of the nature of the new resources so that you have energy if it's flat. Two other approaches that could be used for decarbonizing heat is heat pumps, industrial heat pumps, similar to what's being installed in residences. And as I said, those are more efficient, but they need to operate all the time. Unless you can hold them battery storage, but that will obviously add some cost and certain efficiencies to do so. Alternatively, you could build electrolyzers, which generally could be have some flexibility to it. But electrolyzers are really expensive. You want to run those things as often as possible in order to take advantage of the high capital costs that you just invested. So you aren't really designed with the same level of inherent flexibility that this technology is designed. And they're also less efficient the whole life cycle because you're using renewables, you're using that through this inefficient electrolyzer process, burning, which itself is not as efficient as near 95% efficient resistant heating. So that's why I think this is really unique type of future load. And listening to the earlier presentation and thinking about and how is this different, you really have to think about for each of these load types, where are they going to be located? And these are industrial nodes, mostly at existing industrial facilities, right? We're talking about new chip manufacturing, new data centers where people are choosing where to install. Also important is the voltage that they're going to connect to, as well as the shape of the profiles of the demand that you see here. And also, the last thing, and kind of why when I hear Texas, they're in double win. I don't know if that's quite the case, because some of these are going to be very present. So we're going to look at where it may make sense. But some things like manufacturing, it does, it will be present. Things like hydrogen, industrial demands like this will be quite present. So that's something to keep in mind when you hear about these different large loads. All right, so why thermal batteries? Because we're looking to decarbonize the economy. About 12% of U.S. emissions come from heating and industrial processes. That's broken down into 3 general types of process emissions: combustion emissions, or heat and food. About 40% of that is middle section. And you can see, and I'll have the graphic in a minute to break down this, but that's split mostly with refining and bulk chemicals, iron and steel at the bottom, kind of big industrial processes. But it's also, food manufacturing is there, food and beverages, wood products, aluminum, plastics, and other manufacturing. And then on the right, you see how it's broken down by temperature. 75% of it is low and medium temperature. Thermal batteries can already do. Heat pumps are designed really for the low temperature portion of this. They can't get above 100 degrees C very well. But it's not really a direct correlation between the two. Like at a refinery, you have low pressure, medium pressure, and high pressure steam. And it's necessary to use and efficiently use that throughout the system. So even in a single facility, you might have different thermal needs. So that's the first driver, and then the second driver is this advantage that thermal batteries will have to help support decarbonization of the power system by being available to the excess generation. I pulled these 2 graphics here from collaborative report, Industrial Thermal Decarbonization. I highly recommend it. It's a great report that really breaks down the scale. They looked at how do we do 100% decarbonization of industrial processes. One thing that really jumped out to me is balance of electrification versus hydrogen in that report. I feel like it's been kind of a default for a long time in pathways and long-term studies. That hydrogen is going to be the vehicle for decarbonizing as far to electrified industries. But electrification actually has, I think, quite an amount of energy supply compared to hydrogen. And so hydrogen, within electrification, as I noted, heat pumps and thermal batteries are a large part of that. So currently, U.S. thermal demand in industrial processes is about 10,000 TBTUs. I have to look up exactly what that meant to make sure I got my units right. But a TBTU is a million. So if you fully electrify all of that, and this is total bookend estimate, then it'd be 1,000 gigawatts of thermal batteries to serve that demand. So that's 1,000 gigawatts of charging capacity that doesn't necessarily have data. That's a big number, and a lot of this is from refineries. If electric vehicles do, pick up, and hoping that they do, they are. This refineries section likely will get smaller, not due to reducing. Chemicals, on the other hand, is part of our lives. It's also a lot of that is based on petroleum. I would work at gold refineries and chemical plants that will do exactly the same. You can specialty chemicals, it gets a little bit different. But that's not likely to go away. I'm going to doesn't go away. And then the next section is food. So to kind of make this a little bit more tangible, I thought let's look at the food projection of the food sector here. And this is what the RTC projected for how you again the goal here was to decarbonize everything by 2050. Here, for the food sector, they accelerated that really getting to 100% by 2035. And you can see electrification is a big part of that. So just for the food sector, that would require 70 gigawatts of thermal battery capacity. If you serve this with heat pumps, it'd be 8 gigawatts, which is a big difference. But just the two reasons why that's so different is because the load factor of heat pumps is high, 100% operating all the time. So you have to kind of stuff the demand for thermal batteries into 4 days of the day. And then because you have 100%, 101 COP for thermal batteries versus 3 for heat pumps. So, but then the question is, if the goal here is to decarbonize, what's the source of renewable energy that you're using to give this very flat profile where thermal batteries are designed to align with renewable energy? So I thought that'd be helpful to get a sense because we are seeing some astounding numbers on just SRP. But this is to put it in some context. There's some real progress being made on the deployment of these technologies. On the right here, you see 5 different manufacturers that are commercialize their technologies. 2 specifically just received grants from the DOE. The DOE had a relatively large, I think it's over $1 billion overall for industrial decarbonization, and 500 million specifically for electrification type of approaches, which included heat pumps, electric furnaces, as well as this thermal batteries. The 2 to point out, electrified thermal solutions get 35 to deploy the thermal batteries at a chemical plant. Interestingly enough, these are both in Kentucky. For a chemical plant, and that's been replaced natural gas boilers. For Rondo, 75 million it's to replace gas-fired heat at production facilities. For spirits, ready to drink cocktails, and whiskey. So if you want to mix some decarbonized whiskey. The bottom number here of my estimate is that it would avoid 17,000 metric tons per year of CO2 emissions, which I backed out through kind of gas. And so at those Rondo facilities, that would be about 30 to 40 megawatts. For so this is kind of that small food slice. This is one of those facilities. That would be about 30 to 40 megawatts. So to kind of fit in the 2 order of magnitude, it's not the highest, but even for a small-ish food processing drinks facility, that's significant. All right, so next to going into the business case, what does this look like on the cost side? I'll show you a few ways that this could work in terms of building this out, but also charging renewable energy. One thing to keep in mind here is that this is a cost analysis, but there's other things to consider. And it's really interesting talking to some of the developers about this. First of all, they want to know what's possible, but they also want to know what is possible now. What can they do immediately? But they also said, the cost analysis is nice, but you have to consider some of these people like decarbonization goals. So they're willing to pay a bit of a premium. And then also for some of them, the cost of electricity might be a relatively small part of their overall cost. So it's sometimes if you get too detailed just on gas versus electrification, you're missing a bit of the bigger picture. But it's also really important to break that down and look like super metals. So we conducted a series of analyses in this scenario really about power procurement for these thermal batteries. So we looked at a situation with $6 per million gas. That these are a lot of these facilities would have access to wholesale gas. A lot of them want to take retail gas. So $6 in that case is that's higher than it is today, but it's not crazy. And then we looked at with it without a $50. And then for renewable supply, we looked at co-located renewables, standalone thermal batteries, and grid or and the key thing here is the point is that thermal batteries can be cost competitive with natural gas, depending on the configuration of the power, and especially access to wholesale prices. So to take a look at where electricity prices are especially low, we put together these figures on the right. They're very hard to see, but obviously red is bad, purple is here. Yellow is kind of where you want to be, where you're kind of in the $20 megawatt hour electricity prices. And then top to bottom, we're looking at 24-hour averages. 8 hours is the lowest price within a day. 4 hours and 1 hour. So as I said, thermal batteries would be kind of in the middle there, 4 to 8 hour. And you can see a lot of the country, there's obviously parts of the country that are very attractive because they're really clean deep currently, and no one really lives there. So, and there's not a lot of manufacturing, right? So it looks attractive. People are considering where to install a new facility. That may be a good thing to look at. And also the developers are looking where to kind of reach out to customers. But you're constrained by where people are living. And I think this can also be a bit, the prices there are low because there's really cheap renewables, but there's also transmission constraints. Cheap renewables are likely to be persistent. Transmission constraints can be a little bit more transient. So we've seen the last few years that renewables tend to outpace transmission catches up. So it's something that you have to kind of take some risks on if you're going to expose yourself specifically to power prices. But getting into the cost analysis, this is analysis of 4 different scenarios, 3 different scenarios where you have below located renewables and different levels of interaction with the grid. And the last one is if you just charge off of the lowest price wholesale compared to gas all in. So you can see starting with scenario 2, that's where you're strictly off grid. You're building solar or wind on site. This was actually based on this in that nice SPP area, assuming that you're having access to about $20-30 PPA per whatever, and are able to take advantage of generation. But scenario 2 is where you are fully behind the meter, essentially. You have to overbuild a bit to account for low periods. The bottom shows that you occasionally might have to use existing gas. But you can see that situation is the highest prices, net of revenues, potential revenues, and higher than current gas, continuous gas, plus a GHG. You start getting down below kind of the threshold of some of this pricing GHG and below just the gas itself. If you start, so scenario 2 is strictly off grid. Scenario 3 is you start selling your excess to the system, so that you can earn some revenues above the power system. And scenario 4 is you now have two-way connected grid, or you're making kind of decisions on when to buy and sell a system. And then 5 is where you're just pulling off of the excess grid. A lot of negative price hours, hours on the system. Important to note, and the last one is it's harder to demonstrate that you decarbonize the situation than the good system right now to make it direct or using what would otherwise be curtailed tools. So you kind of have to take down with the grain of salt for corporations that are trying to improve their sustainability. With some type of direct power purchase agreement on site and off site for wind resources. This is where it gets, I think, really interesting thinking about if you are going to be procuring renewables off the system. Are you able to access the wholesale prices that are available, or if you're distribution connected, are you going to be charged for your electricity at the existing rates? Obviously, there's a lot of embedded costs in existing rates, and this is a technology that's designed to not be adding peak demand, not to be adding to reserve requirements on the generation side, the transmission side. There is some additional distribution that we're assuming necessary in the monitoring structure that's here, that is intended to reflect their cost causation So, you know, this is a bit of a hypothetical. You really have to look at the particulars of the plant, but it's striking to see how different this would be. And how you have to think differently for this type of delivery, which is very different from, you know, the other loads that we talked about. And pretty much any existing load that. So I think it's, you know, this is a potential significant roadblock. If you're looking to deploy this today, and interested in this later panel that covers some of this access to wholesale prices. Then I think would be an interesting addition to this discussion. So that's the long and short. There's a couple of barriers that we've identified. A lot of them we're looking up. This is a little bit of an earlier stage technology. It needs to start and accepted as policymakers. The DOE is going to support the deployment of this technology. But as you saw, the majority of it, I should have pointed out that the pink down here is the CapEx for the thermal batteries. The rest of it is electricity costs. So that's why that is an important component of deploying this technology. Is how can you most closely reflect costs that's deposit systems charging that to that this load. So that's the largest barrier that we've identified. I think I can leave some of these other points to wrap up. And I think I did most of these long, but interested in any questions we can have a discussion. Yeah.